respond. We will respond, but we will be putting American lives at risk in that situation. We need to do everything we can to deter that from happening. The cost associated with going to full-scale war with Russia is far worse than anything we've had to do today. Now, but here's the thing that people are not understanding about this whole concept. We made a commitment to Ukraine in 1991 that we would support them if they gave up their nuclear weapons. That's the thing that keeps us the most safe. We do it right here at Hill Air Force Base. It's called the Sentinel program. That keeps global security across the entire world because people know not to mess with us. When Obama was president, Putin took over Crimea. Nothing happened during President Trump. They didn't advance. When Biden was president, they advanced again. If President Trump is back in the White House and he came up with an idea, President Trump came up with an idea to support Ukraine right now and get this to a point where he can end this conflict. And I hope we can end this before it ever enters into anything related to an Article 5 breach, anything related to our NATO allies.
If I could ask a follow-up question, and we'll go to you, Mr. Miller, and then to you, Mr. Moore, and you'll each have 1 minute for a follow-up if you need it. What exactly do you believe Congress can do to deter Russia from expanding its aggression into NATO countries that would incite a military response?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that the sanctions that the Biden administration has imposed aren't really doing us any favors right now. It's not hindered Russia's progress, and Russia's still going on, and their military might is obviously stronger and more resilient than the Ukrainian military might. And one thing that I want to bring up about Ukraine is Ukraine's not an ally. So, and what is the end goal with Ukraine? Why do we keep funding the Ukraine war? Because Ukraine does not really have a real economic impact on the U.S. They only are about $2 billion of trade between the U.S. and Ukraine, which is 0.1%. So why are we so invested in Ukraine? And I want to ask Congressman Moore, where are we getting the money to fund the Ukraine war?
Mr. Moore, starting with the follow-up question, what can Congress do? What can the United States do to deter Russia? Largely what I had just expressed. You can't deter Russia without keeping them from invading and taking full control of Ukraine. That you don't get to have it both ways in this situation. Russia could easily take their tanks and walk into Kyiv. And I hope that no American, no matter where you feel about our support for Ukraine, I hope we all can agree that we do not want to see Vladimir Putin and Russian tanks entering into Kyiv. Right? And if you don't want to call them an ally, great. That's your point. They're not a NATO ally, but they are fighting for their own democracy. When you have private, personal conversations with people that have been there, Senate President Stuart Adams in particular, who's okay with me sharing anything related to this, just seeing the children that are being abducted and killed and taken back to Russia to be re-educated. Like, they're fighting for their own democracy, and we have supported them with less than 0.2% of our GDP. And we've galvanized NATO, we've galvanized our European allies to do the lion's share of the humanitarian work, and our job was to provide lethal aid for them to be able to fight back when they're willing to fight for themselves without putting a single American life at risk. We're able to deter them from doing this. To your exact question, we can deter them if we're willing to support them. It cannot be an endless war, though. That's why I talk about getting President Trump back in the White House. He has, I believe, the capability to end this conflict. Thank you. Mr. Miller asked you a question, so I'll give you 20 seconds to respond, and then, Mr. Miller, we'll come back to you for some time to rebut here on this, and then we'll move on to the next question. He asked, where would the money come from? Where, if we're going to continue, if deterring Russia requires continuing to support Ukraine militarily to prevent Russia from taking Ukraine, where does that money come from?
Right. What I'm strongly concerned about, and I'll take most of my questions from you, Ms. Rose, today. What I'm concerned about mostly, though, is what it would cost us if you let Putin walk into Ukraine and you let Russian tanks enter in Kyiv, and then it breaches Article 5 of our NATO treaty. The cost will be astronomical. And most of all of this money is supporting jobs here back in the U.S. that we can provide them, simply lethal supply. And part of it is actually in a loan package that President Trump came up with this idea.
Mr. Miller.
So he talks about protecting democracy. And, you know, it's not our job to protect democracy all around the world. If that were our job, we would be bankrupt. and we are bankrupting ourselves doing that. And also, he mentioned children getting abducted. Well, what about the funding that he's contributing to along our southern border, where children are being rented and abducted, and they're being abused and brought into this huge migration crisis on our southern border?
We're going to get to the immigration question, so let's move on to the next question.
But just as he brought up something, I have absolutely no idea what he's talking about with funding that I've supported. That's completely out of... So one thing you're going to always get from me is the reality of this job. And it's unfortunate because there's so much spin and so much political rhetoric that gets spewed. You will always get reality out of me, as I mentioned in my opening statement. There will be rhetoric and there will be reality. And to me, that is what I will always get. I have no idea what the gentleman's talking about. Thank you.
We're going to address immigration in just a moment, so if you'll bear with me here, let's move on to the next question. And this question goes to you, Mr. Moore, first. If elected, you would likely be part of a very narrow, either majority or minority,
yes, we will,
in a closely divided Congress. How would you work in that situation to the benefit of a second district? Would you be open to compromise?
Second district, you mean first district, right?
So you're talking about the benefit of the first.
Talking about Northern Utah.
To your
yeah, it's been very difficult. It's been the 118th Congress has been unique, as we all have been able to see and watch. So being in a narrow majority is tough, and you have to work really hard at building relationships, establishing trust. And when there was a seat open up, I disagree with why there was a seat in leadership opening up last fall. When there was a seat that was opened up, at first I was reluctant to it because I was joked with my chief of staff, like, why in the world would I run for leadership? Don't you see what they do, the leadership around here, as we just vacated a speaker and basically the first time in history? But I knew it was going to be important for Utah. I knew it's important for Utah to have a voice at the table. When I first ran, I said, I want to take Utah principles back to Washington, and I don't want that to just be a bumper sticker. And so I ran for this leadership position, kind of putting myself out there. And we have had, if you look at the outcomes that we've been able to have as a House majority, a narrow majority, it's not easy, but we're accomplishing things. We're keeping all of President Biden's spending completely at bay. He enacted over $5 trillion. My time is up, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk more about this. But you have to build relationships, and you have to stick together as a team. Sometimes we do it, and we haven't done it in some other times.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you'll have an additional 10 seconds here for your response. If elected, you'd be part of a very narrow majority or minority in Congress. How will you work to the benefit of the first district, and will you be open to compromise?
Yeah, a lot of that deals with inflation and voting for these spending bills. Congressman Moore talks about voting against funding Biden's agenda, but yet look at what he's voted for as far as spending bills. All of them. All of the omnibus and minibus bills. He's funded Biden's agenda. So I know that it's going to be really hard and difficult if I were to get into Congress. I'm not running to be part of the uniparty or the establishment. I'm running to be different and to make a difference and not to enrich myself. I want good, positive policy for the first district and for America. And, I'm not running to compromise. I think that the Republican Party has compromised their principles too much. And it seems like the Democrats are the only ones that win out of the compromise. And so I am running to change that, and we need to get real results and implement real policy that's beneficial to the first district.
Mr. Moore, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yes, thank you. So let's talk about the reality here of what's going on. So when I'm in the minority, it's very easy. In fact, I did it vast majority of time, voted against pretty much all of President Biden's spending agenda. Inflation comes from the American Rescue Plan, the $2 trillion no offset spending bill that he enacted his first 2 months in office when the Senate flipped. The reality of the appropriations process, when Republicans are in the majority, even with a narrow majority, we did what we haven't been able to do since 2013. Republicans have been able to support defense and lower non-defense discretionary with a $2 trillion savings out of the budget cycle. That's not my numbers, that's CBO numbers. So $2 trillion is taken out when you support something. It's easy to vote no. When you're in the majority, though, you've got to lead. And we've been back there trying to lead this through. I support Speaker Johnson in his effort to try to trim out as much of this budget as we possibly can while keeping all of President Biden's other initiatives that he would want to do completely at bay.
Mr. Miller, you'll have an additional 30 seconds for your rebuttal.
Yeah, so he talks about cutting $2 trillion out of our budget. But that $2 trillion is over a 10-year period. So that means that you will need the majority in Congress in order to approve those spending cuts every single time. So it only helps when we're in the majority, and we can't bank on that. And also, every time that we vote for the deficit that we've continued to have, it increases our interest payment, which our interest payment will soon catch up to us, and soon we'll be printing money to pay that off, which causes inflation.
Mr. Moore, I'll give you one more rebuttal and I ask you to respect the clock at 30 seconds, please.
Absolutely, and that's great because as I mentioned, the budget cycle, I'm not trying to hide that information. All that's what a budget cycle is. That's what the CBO does. The vast majority of the appropriations bill supports our defense, our veterans, our border security, our homeland security. That's what that goes. That's the big misnomer that often gets missed in a lot of the rhetoric that you'll see. But the reality is we need to make sure that we support our defense community, right? And especially when you represent 25,000 plus individuals serving every day to support our defense community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, 30 seconds and we'll move on.
I'm okay.
All right, next question we have, it will go to you, Mr. Miller, and it's actually a video question from a student at Southern Utah University. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm Abby Bidon. I'm a student of political science, sociology, and law at Southern Utah University. My question for you is, there's been recent discussion in the media about whether or not Election Day should be a national holiday so more people could vote. What is your stance on this issue? Thank you.
Mr. Miller, to you.
I love this question. Thank you so much for asking it. And yes, I think that the first Tuesday in November should be a national holiday, and it should be one that Americans get off. I feel like ever since the universal mail-in voting has been implemented, there has been fraud, despite what the media might tell you. And so we do need to secure our elections. We do need voter ID when we vote. And we need to help safeguard our elections to make them more secure.
Mr. Moore.
Yes, I love the idea of a national holiday for this. It's an important thing. It is something that could, I think, get a lot of broad bipartisan support. And so agree with the question. And the thing that, one of the very first bills, so when you have a chance to serve in Congress, this is not something I understood right away, but before I got there, your first 10 bills called HR 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 10, that tells you what the priority is. Republicans, when we got the majority, was energy, was immigration and border security, and then it was our HR 3 was tax reform. We have a very important year in 2025 with regards to all of the President Trump signed into law tax provisions in 2017. Those are going to be expiring next year. Those are our HR 1 through 3. Democrats put in HR 1. Their HR 1 was this this bill that would obliterate all the things required to run safe and secure elections. And that was something that I was very strongly against. And if they get back in the majority, I assume it'll be their HR 1 again.
Thank you. Let's talk immigration, gentlemen. Congress has been unable to reach an agreement on immigration reform for decades at this point. A comprehensive, negotiated, bipartisan reform package was defeated earlier this year. What would you do to address the immigration issue? Would you support bipartisan legislation to solve the crisis? And this first question goes to Mr. Moore.
Thank you. So the most important thing that we can be doing on our immigration right now is to enact HR 2. Senator Schumer is obviously not going to do it, unfortunately. We've given him every opportunity that he had. Fortunately, there are also a handful of Republicans that were unwilling to support it as well. Back last September, I believe it was, and it actually lost us some leverage. Those are the downsides to being in a narrow majority, is we didn't have the leverage to be able to get this across the finish line. But Senator Schumer's had the chance to do it. The whole talk about bipartisan legislation regarding immigration, most everybody actually agrees with it. We know we need to fix a lot of our visa programs, our H-2A, H-2B. We have workforce needs here that could easily be filled by these. But unless you do the border security apparatus first, remain in Mexico, end catch and release, fix the parole authority, you will only invite more border or cartel activity at the southern border. And that's what's been going on at this crisis over the last 3 years. That's what we're trying to do. You have to deal with border security first and then come on board with a merit-based immigration reform program that a lot of people already agree with. So that's the reality of this one.
Mr. Miller, and you'll have an additional 10 seconds.
Yeah, I also agree with H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act of 2023, that was legislation that I would also support. You know, I'm not here to compromise on the Democrats' immigration policies. I think the laws that we have in place right now are the laws that we need to continue. And we just need to enforce the law. And so Mr. Moore, or Congressman Moore, talked about he didn't fund the border. Well, he voted for H.R. 4665, which talks about migration and refugee assistance, which was it was in the billions of dollars for funding for migration assistance. And so, yes, he is funding Biden's border policies. And not to mention, he also voted for the omnibus bill, which also furthered Biden's agenda. But we do need, one thing that Congressman Moore forgot to mention is we need to finish the wall. We do need the border wall, and it is a huge safeguard as far as illegal immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Right. Again, the omni that he mentions, again, is the appropriations process, and Republicans, being in the majority, led that process. We got the best deal that we could possibly get. We haven't done what we did since Republicans were in control of Congress in 2013 to support defense and lower non-defense discretionary. We need to make sure that we at least provide some security to our border agents right now, and we don't want to make them go to work without getting paid. That's the part that I think I'm going to disagree with my challenger here on.
Mr. Miller, yes, 30 seconds.
Yeah, in the omnibus bill was chocked full of foreign assistance. And that is exactly what we need to get out of our spending. We don't need to be borrowing money from China to go and spend it in some foreign nation. That is exactly what we need to get out of our budget. And one thing that I would love Congressman Moore to answer is what was the most let's see, how do I want to word this? What was the most negative thing that we passed in the omnibus bill? He talks about positives, but what's the negative? What did we compromise?
Would you like a rebuttal,
No,
Mr.
I'll
Moore?
take the questions from you, Ms. Rose.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Next question is from social media. We have a member of our online audience named Justin Hill. And this question goes first to you, Mr. Miller. Would either candidate support legislation to remove the National Firearms Act and Gun Control Act? Mr. Miller.
Yeah, there are some things that we might need to change in the NFA. But I think where the Second Amendment is right now is in a pretty good spot. I support, going through certain regulations as far as getting fully automatics, but I in no way support a semi-automatic weapons ban, or assault rifle ban, or any other restrictions on our Second Amendment rights as they currently sit.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
All right, I have a very strong rating with organizations like the National Shooting Sportsman Foundation, NRA. These groups see that I'm a very strong supporter of the Second Amendment, reasonable in my approach to be able to enact good legislation too. So with the NFA, it doesn't have the support to get past a Senate filibuster, and it's not subject to the budget reconciliation process that is required when you have the White House, House, and Senate. So it's essentially, it's not going to happen. It's been talked about for decades, but what we need to do is to make sure that what we used, and particularly with this appropriations process, we got it so veterans are never going to be targeted through their bank account. If they bounce a check, there would be Second Amendment issues. They would have their Second Amendment rights potentially taken away. And we stood firm as a Republican conference to make sure that we got rid of that. Gun Owners of America lauded us passing the appropriations process to use that piece of leverage. We're also doing something else with suppressors. There's the Pittman-Robertson Act that puts a lot of the money towards conservation. Gun owners, hunters are our nation's first conservationists. They want healthy forests. We are taking a bill that would take the money that is used on these suppressors and moving it over to the Pittman-Robertson. It's lauded by all of the big gun groups and the sportsman folks as some of the best, most logical legislation we can do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have now reached the halfway point of the debate featuring Republican primary candidates Paul Miller and Blake Moore in District 1. Once again, I'm Julie Rose, and we encourage you to submit your questions during this live broadcast. Use the hashtag UTDebates on social media. Now let's return to the debate. You've both mentioned large bills, omnibus bills, and we have seen many very large bills covering an array of issues, both budget and issue bills in Congress. If you agree with the majority of the policies in a bill, but disagree with some parts, would you vote against it or vote in support as a compromise? How do you draw that line? Mr. Moore, we'll start with you.
Thank you. This is a question ultimately about leadership. I would say that Speaker Johnson has done the yeoman's work to take over where we were last fall. And even he would say, I don't support every single thing that was in the annual appropriations process. But what we did with the annual appropriations process was make sure that we supported defense. We gave the biggest military pay increase that we've been able to do. We're working on some for some of the younger, newer airmen and other enlisted folks as we approach the next cycle for FY25. But when you're in the majority, you get an opportunity to lead. And if there's something to quibble about, you do everything you can to be able to remove that piece of legislation. Oftentimes, what a lot of the rhetoric gets spewed about is early in the process. You have to advance some of these bills, but you know once it goes through the conferencing, it will be taken out before the final passage. And so a lot of the rhetoric gets spewed about something that's early on in the bill, and as you move it along the process, it ultimately gets removed. We know it's going to get removed, but again, you can't control all of the false narratives that go out there, but what you can do is make sure that you're reducing spending at every turn that you possibly can and using every piece of leverage. Thank you.
Mr. Miller, to you, would you like me to repeat the question?
Sure.
We have seen very large bills covering an array of issues, both budget bills, issue bills in Congress. If you agree with the majority of the policies in a bill, but disagree with some other parts, do you vote against it? Do you vote in support as a compromise? How do you draw that line? And you're welcome to take 5 extra seconds.
Yeah, like that's the thing. What is a deal breaker? What is a deal breaker? How? And you know, one of the bills that Congressman Moore voted for was the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023, where it entered women into the draft. So if that's not a deal breaker, what is a deal breaker? We need to get a lot of this foreign assistance out of our debt, like I had said previously. And we need, you know, and all of these have been agreed upon by the Republican conference in the House. We need single line veto item power. We need to debate each appropriations division individually. And we need ample time to debate and vet these spending bills. And that process is not being entertained. And so every time that they bring a spending bill to the floor, it's always 24 to 48 hours before the spending expires, resulting in a government shutdown if they don't vote for it. So if they're always going to, and my opponent has always said that he will not vote against a spending bill if there's a government shutdown tied to it. So if they're always going to use this process, he will never vote against spending.
Mr. Moore, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Once again, never said that, but my challengers can say whatever they're going to say. They have to grab at straws, and that's just the game that we're playing in this world of politics. The key piece here, so government shutdowns. Have they ever solved our debt? No. I don't want to go to a government shutdown, but we use as much leverage as we can before that moment happens. But if we're ready to go and stand firm on something, which we weren't before this appropriations bill, because we were getting what we required back last summer, was to increase defense and lower non-defense, that was a significant win for us.
Mr. Miller, yes, 30 seconds.
Yes, Representative Moore did say that he would not vote. He wouldn't vote against.
Never. He said I would never vote against.
He would not vote against a spending bill
here, because if he's going to make accusations, we need to make sure that we're very clear about what I would do. I would absolutely go to a government shutdown if the Republican conference is united in getting us out of that shutdown. But if we're fractured and we already got what we required of it, then going to a shutdown would be arbitrary and it would be for political points, which I'm not back in Washington to do.
Let's let Mr. Miller respond. Thank you.
Happily.
So he had a town hall at the Hill Air Force Base Aerospace Museum, and he talked about a government shutdown has never resulted in decreased spending. So I will not vote against a government shutdown. And so if you're never going to vote against a government shutdown, then congressional leadership will take this abusive process and shove it down our throats every single time. It's time that we start voting no, time to get all of the rules that we've already agreed to in the Republican conference in the House, and not suspend the rules every time that there's a spending bill.
You'll each have 30 more seconds to do rebuttal if you'll respect the clock. Thank you, Mr.
My
Moore.
challenger brought up something earlier that I actually already highlighted. about kind of the rhetoric that gets spewed about if it's in the bill very early on. When we're in the minority, this was something that happened back in the 117th Congress, which we've already been through a whole election cycle about, was the women in the draft clause. I voted against that. I voted against that provision. The bill passed because Democrats put it in there, and then we had it removed during the conferencing process. It's very simple, but I'm not going to stop our support for our military because of one provision that we know is going to be removed before we vote on the final bill. That's the rhetoric. Again, what you have to deal with in this role, but it is what it is, and I just want to make sure that I'm very clear about that.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
And this is his reasoning for funding Biden's agenda as well. So you can vote against it in an amendment, but you don't have to vote for it in the end. And yet he'll vote for it in the end every single time, furthering Biden's agenda, furthering the left's agenda. And so if you're not ready to
say every single time.
Please wait until he finishes.
But if
He's
he
got
says
10 more
every
seconds.
single time, and I
You'll
have
have a
a
moment for
track
rebuttal.
record over 3.5 years of voting against virtually all of Biden's major spending and appropriations bills in my first term.
Please
Except
wait for the
when I'm
rebuttal,
in the majority,
Mr. Moore.
I will support our speaker if we can drive this agenda forward.
Mr. Miller, please go ahead and finish.
Okay, I will correct that. Yes. Since they've been in the majority, he has funded Biden's agenda. Okay, that's probably accurate.
Not necessarily, because Biden wouldn't want to put parity between he would want to put parity between defense and non-defense. I'm just being accurate. I committed to my constituents that I will be about reality and not rhetoric, and not lies, and not the false narratives that get spewed in this crazy world of politics. But I get why they exist. But I want to be very clear. Biden's agenda would have put parity on defense and non-defense. And what we did is we increased defense and lowered non-defense discretionary. That's not Biden's agenda. And the CBO director even admitted that to us in our committee hearing.
We're going to move on. Mr. Miller, do you have 15 seconds more that you'd
Yeah,
like to say without making additional accusations that will continue this?
Yeah. And so that's the thing. And you asked this question earlier. When is the threshold of when do you vote on a spending bill? You know, what are we going to compromise? And that's the thing. Like, I'm not here to further Biden's agenda or the left's agenda. Like, we need to stop compromising.
We agree on that.
Thank you both. Moving on to the next question, and I believe it is Mr. Miller that will have the first response here. The personal income tax cuts passed by Congress in 2017 will expire in 2025. Do you favor the extension of those cuts? Why or why not?
Yes, I absolutely do, because it helps the middle and low income families in the district. And I already know what my opponent's going to say. He's going to say that he's going to need to be on the budget committee to implement these policies.
Ways and Means Committee. It goes through the Ways and Means
Please
Committee,
wait until you'll have your opportunity. You will have your opportunity.
So he's going to be the only one to be in Congress, and so he needs to get reelected, so that way we can push this. The Speaker of the House will find somebody else that will also vote in favor of these tax cuts. And so, which they are important. And, you know, tax cuts for middle-income or middle-class Americans is very important. And we need to protect those.
Mr. Moore.
I'll continue on with that because I am absolutely so excited about being in a position in 2025 to redo all of the tax provisions that were done by President Trump and congressional Republicans back in 2017. We have seen strong, sustained economic growth since that took place, and it has weathered storm, it weathered COVID, it even weathered Democrat spending when they had one-party rule in 21 and 2022. Worked really hard to get on this committee because I knew Utah runs the best type of we're the #1 economy in the country. Utah needs representation. We had some of this representation, and much of it when Senator Hatch was in the Senate. There is only one committee, however, in the House, and even one committee in all of Congress that generates a revenue bill like this type of tax-related bill, and that's the House Ways and Means Committee. And I fought like crazy to be on this because I wanted to take what I know Utah does so well and inject it. I am on 3 different tax teams: international competitiveness, community, and family tax. The things that the Democrats get wrong about this is we doubled the standard deduction for lower and middle-income Americans, and we also increased the child tax credit. That's what Republicans did in 2017, and all they do is sit there and lie about the fact that this is just for the wealthy, and it's not. This is actually what grew our real wage growth without increasing inflation, and I look forward to repeating that for next year.
Thank you. Let's talk about health care, and this question will go to you first, Mr. Moore. Health care costs for all Americans, including Utahns, have risen dramatically. What would you do as a member of Congress to reduce health care costs?
There's only 2 things we can do to get after health care costs. and that is to make a market, an industry that thrives like virtually every other industry that we have in our private sector. Healthcare has never, and for as long as I can remember, and as long as I've been alive, as long as we've been alive, we have never had a healthcare market that's focused on two things: transparency and competition. And you think about that. You have the choice as a consumer to make decisions virtually every day. When you go to the grocery store, which tires you're going to go put on your car, what you do with regards to even when I talk insurance because it's health related, your car insurance, you get a chance to identify what's going to be cheaper, what's going to be not. We don't have that in this system. So this year, the Ways and Means Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee, they have joint jurisdiction over healthcare. I sit on the health subcommittee, and what we're doing is we're able to take out a lot of the glut, and it even ended up being a very bipartisan approach to a lot of the process that goes on with respect to filing a claim and everything that's related with insurance. The second thing is quality measures from CMS. They're absolutely horrible and archaic. We've got a bill that will address that. And then getting these two provisions, transparency and competition, are huge for this market. And the only thing that will save and reduce costs, instead of just otherwise you just finance it a different way, right? You got to be able to actually deal with the root cause.
Yes. Mr. Miller, same question.
Yeah, so I know that we've implemented regulations as far as transparency of costs and for competition, to promote competition. But I think this is one industry that the federal government needs to have less regulation in. And we need to not always turn to the federal government to solve all of our problems. So I think the more regulation and the more policies around this are just going to hurt the middle class and low income families. And it'll result in more reporting and more resources that are devoted to that, and so it'll just increase the cost of our health insurance.
If I could ask a follow-up related to Medicare, trustees of the Medicare Fund predict that it will become insolvent in 2036. How would you shore up Medicare? Again, this will go to Mr. Moore first. How would you shore up Medicare, and are you interested in cutting benefits to beneficiaries?
This year, the House Budget Committee passed what's called the Fiscal Commission Act, and it's an attempt that's been in the works for a while, and we passed it out of committee, and it's actually getting held up right now. It's unfortunate because we know that Senator Schumer, Majority Leader Schumer, won't necessarily take it up, but we want to continue to promote the good process that this would create. Medicare and Social Security will run insolvent in 2033. Actuaries differ plus or minus two or so years. At that point, all of the folks that are on these programs will have a 24% immediate cut. That's already in law. So when Democrats say, don't touch Social Security, and they write ads about this and they attack our members from all over the place, they don't hit me, they hit areas in like California and New York that give us the majority in Congress. It's completely disingenuous, because if we do nothing, we will actually be facing a massive shortfall. And so we need to do the Fiscal Commission Act, which will put the best minds together, and it will actually create, it comes up with the recommendations, but it forces us to vote on it. It's not just a pie in the sky, these are good ideas. It will actually force Congress. It's the catalyst that we need to actually get something done on here, and it will be the best thing for our entire debt.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I got it.
Thank you.
So as he talks about the Fiscal Commission Act, that deals a lot with reporting. So reporting is good, but if you're already voting for our federal runaway spending, like, what good does a report do for you if you're still going to vote for that spending? As far as Medicare goes, we need to filter out some of the waste. There's a lot of waste in Medicare and improper payments, which is another bill that my opponent proposed. And so we need to filter out the waste and the improper payments and get it to be a more well-oiled machine. And I know that there's going to be experts in the field, doctors and administration in the healthcare industry that we're going to have to get a hold of and devise a data-driven plan to help Medicare run more efficiently, because the government is not very good at running efficiently.
Mr. Moore, 30 seconds.
Thanks. I just want to clear up. I think my challenger is talking about the fiscal state of the nation, which is my bill, which we did pass out of committee, and that is a reporting requirement that will take place. That's not the Fiscal Commission Act. So these are two very, very different bills. Just wanted to make sure that I clarify that for the record. Fiscal Commission is a commission act that will get us to be able to deal with our major debt drivers. Our major debt drivers, again, our three biggest budget line items are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Defense is now becoming lower on the list. We're spending less on defense than we ever have as a nation, and the interest that we're paying on our debt from the decades before that. So again, very important to be clear, fiscal state of the nation is my bill, very supportive of it. It has strong support, but the Fiscal Commission Act is the bill that I'm talking about as the catalyst.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Mr.
letting me
Miller,
clarify
30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, that was an error on my part. And you know, he talks about, you know, our discretionary spending being 23% of the budget, you know, and guess what? That is only going to decrease because of all of the interest that we're paying on our debt. So right now we're $1 trillion in annual interest, and by 2028 that's projected to be $1.4 trillion. So the longer that we go on and don't reduce our spending substantially, then our discretionary spending will just keep looking smaller and smaller. It'll go to 22, 21, 20%. It'll keep shrinking. And so it's still vitally important. It doesn't matter what kind of spending we're talking about. It's all important.
Mr. Moore, 30
getting
seconds.
somewhere here because he is absolutely right. It's 23% of our spending. You can't solve the major debt drivers with only dealing with 23% of our spending. That's all we vote on in Congress. So I established, and with the Americans for Prosperity group came to me and said, hey, we love your voice on this. We want you to be the lead on this particular bill. It's called the Comprehensive Congressional Budget Act. It would force us to vote on the entirety of everything. I'm not scared to take a Medicare and Social Security or those type of votes. But if we only deal with 23%, we'll never get out ahead of our debt issues. And with that 23%, Republicans in the majority found a way to trim out $2.1 trillion over this budget cycle. It was a significant win, and we've got to go tackle the major problems in our budget.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you have 30 more seconds if you'd like.
Yeah, I think I'm okay.
Like I
Great.
said, we're getting somewhere. We're seeing the entirety of the budget, and we've
Thank
got
you.
to be able to go after all of it, not just the small portion.
We have about 5 minutes left in the debate before we get to closing arguments, so we'd like to get through a couple more topics. Next on the list is abortion. The Dobbs case. In that case, the U.S. Supreme Court returned the regulation of abortion to the states. We have seen also recent debate that there should be federal legislation on this issue. Would you support legislation that allowed abortion up to 15 weeks? Why or why not? Mr. Miller, you go first.
So as far as abortion goes, I will not vote for a 13 to 15 week ban on abortion. No, abortion needs to remain in the state's power. You know, it goes through, you know, the federalism rules, and so I would be voting against that. As far as my position, as far as abortion goes, I'm pro-life, and as far as a national abortion ban, I would actually be in favor of a national abortion ban. I know that's not what you're asking, but if we look back and you know, say we're just after the Civil War, was the Emancipation Proclamation good legislation? Well, yes, it was. Why? Because all men are created equal. Well, aren't all babies created equal? If life begins at conception, isn't that a baby? So that is my reasoning behind it, but I don't think that this will come up in the next legislative session.
Because you forewent a few seconds earlier, let me just get a bit of clarification so that we're clear on this. Would you vote in support of a federal abortion ban, or would you not?
Yes.
You would. Thank you. Mr. Moore, you have a minute.
Thanks for clarifying, because I was confused at that too, because he said he wouldn't, and then he said that he would. Look, House Republicans are not going to bring this 15-week abortion limitation, ban, whatever you want to call it, up. President Trump has indicated that he would not support this. What I am fully supportive of right now is for every state to look at what Utah is doing, where we support women that are going through and families that are going through difficult decisions. I've never had to face this. I could never understand fully what we would be going through. But Utah is making it very clear that we support life, and we want to make sure that there is a deterrence from, you know, what existed during Roe. And that's what's so beautiful about Dobbs. I get a little emotional about this because when they were making the arguments for Dobbs, I was flying home and listening to the arguments while I was going to go see my baby who had just been born. I missed his birth when I was back in Washington, D.C. And we need to make sure we do everything we can to protect the sanctity of life. Utah is going to put forth, and they're going to have a track record of showing how we support individuals going through tough things, but we're going to be very firm on what our support is. And then every state needs to look at us and say, hey, Utah's doing it right, just like we do on everything else, whether it be the economy, how we deal with volunteerism, across the board. Utah does it right, and this is something that we need to make sure that other people in other states see how we're going to approach this issue.
Yes, Mr.
Can you ask
Mr.
him
Miller.
if he would be in support of a national abortion ban?
Is that your rebuttal, your request?
Yeah.
I'm happy to ask that question. Do you support a federal ban on abortion?
There is no legislation that will come up to support a federal abortion ban.
If it came up, would
right
you
now.
support it?
If it is something that will protect the sanctity of life, I have an A+ voting record with Susan B. Anthony. It's one of the best organizations that's involved in this space because they're about supporting individuals, they're crisis centers and all that type of stuff. If this is something that's going to promote life and be able to make it, I would absolutely support that. We'll see how President Trump is going to be able to deal with this and handle this. We need to first, what is the reality of what's going on, is to look at the states that are doing it, and they're doing it well, like Utah is going to, and be able to share that and mimic that, and not make this so combative. We need to make this about the women and the children that this ultimately affects.
That's a non-answer.
We're 2 minutes.
I answered fully. I gave it a full answer.
Would you like to say something,
Gave it
Mr.
more
Miller?
context.
No, I'm good.
Thanks.
This will likely be our last question before closing statements. One of the longstanding arguments between Utah and federal government is the management of federal lands. How do you propose to negotiate and improve those federal and state relationships in the future? And this question, I believe, goes to Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore first. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, so bit of a boring concept. It's not going to catch a lot of headlines, but shared stewardship agreements that exist with our state and any of the federal agencies that are involved in our lands. These need to be rock solid, rock tight. We need to show other states how to actually engage in them, and we do these things responsibly. Governor Cox's team, before that Governor Herbert's team, they were always so good about showing the federal government how to best take care of our land. We should be having more control over what goes on in our state. There's no question about that, and every single member of the Utah delegation agrees wholeheartedly with that. We need to address PILT, the eastern states representatives. They have no idea what goes on out here in the West. There's fewer of us, so it's a little bit more difficult. But show them how we do it best, and we'll continue to have good outcomes like we do here.
Thank you. 45 seconds, Mr. Miller.
So our public lands should be coming back towards our state. Our state should have more control over our land. And to be honest, I'd love to see a repeal of the Antiquities Act, where Biden and Obama are taking huge swaths of land in southern Utah and creating monuments out of them. And so this is highly detrimental to our mining and our industry in the area, and it stunts economic growth. And not only that, it affects the hunters, and it affects those that are trying to enjoy the outdoors in southern Utah. And so, yeah, there's a lot of problems with the government and our public lands.
Thank you. We have now reached the end of the debate. And by random drawing held earlier, it was determined that the first closing statement would go to candidate Moore. So, Mr. Moore, Blake Moore, your closing statement. You'll have 1 minute.
Again, thank you, Julie, for a great debate and a great discussion with Mr. Miller. I keep it very simple here, and we already talked about it a little bit. I've worked my tail off. We're getting a constituent service award. Candidly, that's one of the most important things we do, helping my constituents navigate a federal agency that they have to. It's very difficult in a lot of ways. You get stuck in the loop, and we're there to be able to support you and help you navigate getting a passport, dealing with an IRS issue, Social Security, you name it. But next year is an opportunity for Republicans like we haven't had in a long time. We took back the House this last time. I'm thrilled to be a part of going and helping my candidates and other candidates across the country to make sure that we have the numbers to be able to do that. With that, we have kept President Biden's spending to nil. It has been completely obliterated from his ability to do all of the $5 trillion that he did. Next year, we have a chance to redo a lot of what was so successful in 2017. Through the House Ways and Means Committee and through making sure that we have these tax provisions, they're all expiring basically next year. We need to make sure that we reenact them so we have the strongest economy continual in the next 20 to 30 years as our nation. And this is the year that we're going to have a chance to do that. Send me back there. That's why I asked for your vote, so I can continue the work I've been doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Mr. Paul Miller, your closing statement.
Yeah, I am not a politician. I am here to represent the middle class, and that's what I fully intend to do. If I get elected, I won't be the guy at town halls telling you what I've done. I'll be the guy at town halls asking you, what should I do? What policies would you like to see changed? And, you know, I want to represent my friends, my neighbors, and my family, and those in the 1st District. And, you know, Congressman Moore asked for the majority when he ran 2 years ago, and he said that they wanted the majority. And now that they have the majority, they haven't pushed their leverage with the House, and they have compromised way too much. And I feel like that's what we need to cut out of our representation in Washington, D.C. And we need change, and we need it now, especially when it comes to our debt. But I appreciate your support, and I appreciate your vote on June 25th.
Thank you to our candidates Paul Miller and Blake Moore for participating today and for your dedication to public service, both of you. Election Day is Tuesday, June 25th. Contact your county clerk if you have any questions about making your vote count in this election. We greatly appreciate PBS Utah for donating the production facilities to broadcast this debate. We're also grateful for the Larry H. and Gail Miller Family Foundation, Zions Bank, the George S. and Dolores Story Eccles Foundation, and the Stewart Family Foundation for their generous support of the Utah Debate Commission. This debate and others from previous years are available online at utahdebatecommission.org. I'm Julie Rose of BYU Radio. Thank you and good day.
this cup. It's burn that cup.
There.
Where am I looking? I don't ever know about this. I'm looking at you, whether you're asking the question or not.
Okay.
Gee, how are you?
Doing?
It's good to see you.
So it seemed like that you guys, the big difference that I heard today